Okay, welcome to season 2, episode 3. And we're talking about tracking today. We're also using some video, I think.
New for us.
Yeah. So
We
here
get
we
to
are.
actually look at each other in the face while we're doing this.
Although we've been talking long enough, I can always imagine your face anyway while I'm talking.
Totally same.
Yeah. So we're talking about tracking. So, it's super important, but what is it? Why are we talking about tracking? What's tracking for you, Jada?
Oh man, it's for me the tracking piece when it comes to living an awakened life and also working on healing myself and helping others. I think it's really important in so many ways, but for me it shows up obviously in the healing world. But it also tracking is something that to me is kind of an extension of awareness.
Mm,
Like it's sort of like, okay, I'm aware of the moment. I'm aware of what's happening in my life. I'm reflecting on what's happening in my life and around me. But can I take it one step further and track and see, like follow the little like string all the way back to like maybe there is like a deeper place where all of these things that are showing up in my life right now is coming from. So for me, like tracking is sort of like becoming aware of those things so that I can understand them more deeply and then potentially do some healing work on them. Yeah. How would you answer that question?
yeah, tracking. I would answer it so much similar in such a similar way, but it's such a huge awareness and mindfulness practice. And, um, because we can we can find that there's something going on in our physical body or our mental body or our emotional body or our spiritual body or like our energy levels or something's up and
Mhm.
like have no idea what's going on, and that on its own is fear eliciting,
Yes.
because then we don't know, why do I have all of these emotions? Why do my thoughts keep looping and looping? Why can't I sleep? Why do I have this constant pain in my shoulder or my knee or my stomach? All of these things.
Mhm.
Why is my energy so low? And if we can't actually track the point of where that began, or even kind of track it in some way that we can have an idea of what that might be, people get, you know, it creates anxiety. It creates
Mhm.
anxiety and it also creates like a powerlessness. So what I love about tracking is that it's so empowering.
Mhm.
And so for me, tracking, there's like a lot of different w- ways to track, but I like to track through the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual bodies. And um and also through time.
Mhm.
Like when did that begin for me?
Yes.
When
Yeah.
did these cycling thoughts begin? When did this like anger start rising up and kind of like taking over and then I'm just reacting here and there? Like when did that start?
Mhm.
So if I go back in my life and I think, okay, when is the first time I can ever remember that, or the worst time? And we start to see this pattern come together, and
Mhm.
tracking reveals patterns.
Yes.
That's the beautiful thing about tracking. And
Mhm.
when we see a pattern, we can change a pattern.
When we see a pattern, we can own the pattern as well.
Right. Yeah. We have to own it first, for
We have to
sure.
own it because that's the step that takes us out of the disempowered situation where we're just a victim to life. We're a victim to these emotions. We're a victim to the thoughts. It's like, no, actually there's a pattern here and I can own that pattern that's been like woven it through my timeline, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you track?
Hmm.
Tell us a story about your tracking.
I'm not as systematic as you are with the
I'm a
tracking.
very systematic person.
So I'm thinking about, when I'm with a client, for example, I think a lot of my tracking comes through dialogue. And I think intuition. I think that is just something that, like, as I'm talking with clients, I tend to sort of see puzzle pieces come together in my mind. Like, for example, before we jumped on this Zoom call, we were just talking about, one of your health conditions, and you were like, I wonder what this is all about. And I immediately saw, like, or it was more like when we were talking about it and you brought up this herb, I was like, I saw it all kind of come together. And so to me, like, I think that's a bit of how I track is, and
Intuitive?
I think so. And I think that's partly because of my job, is that, for so many years I've been listening to clients, and then I generally will just kind of know, okay, I think this is what we need to look into, essentially. So certainly it's more wild than your way of, like, systematically going through all the things. Um,
I
and
love the wildness.
I
I think we all
it's
we
a
need
little
some wildness.
it's spontaneous, it's wild, it's a bit chaotic. But within that, I'm always trusting that whoever I'm chatting with or talking to, that they have all of the answers and that they're going to tell me what they are.
Yes.
And so part of that is also just me, like, really deeply listening and maybe asking really good questions, or
Yeah.
trying to, at least. I don't know if all my questions are good. Obviously they're not, but, like, just being open to asking good questions and really deeply listening to the answers. And a lot of times when I'm tracking, people will say something to me, they don't realize what they're saying. They don't hear themselves say it.
Yeah.
And it's almost sometimes in what they're not saying that I have to follow that lead. And like, it's like tracking footprints in the wild. Sometimes it's really subtle. Sometimes it's like, where did they not go? That is important, And so to me, it's like, it's a little hard to describe. Because I think it's just as, like, yeah, a little
It's a real
wild, and
art.
it's different with everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really different with everybody.
It's a real art. And I love that you mentioned the questions, because the questions are big, like, the key to tracking, really.
Mhm.
We can feel through things, but even while we're feeling, there's kind of like some questions there. And so that's what's beautiful, for anybody can do tracking on themselves. You know, um, um, as I said, where did this begin? How did it, and sometimes, and a lot of the time, actually, intuitively, things will come up for us, even our questions for ourselves,
Yes.
and before we started recording, you were talking about when you were learning tracking,
Mm.
and you had like this list.
Yes. Yeah, we were in class and Pete said, okay, this was like day zero. It was like, I want everyone to, like, write a list of all your problems and issues. And I was like, oh God, I don't have enough days to do this. I'm like writing in my journal as fast as I can. I've got like 50 or 60 things on the list. Like, I could go on. I don't want to embarrass myself with what was on that list, but, like, it was a long list and it wasn't very kind to myself. And then he said, okay, I want everybody to look at their list and pick out like 2 or 3 themes. Like, of all of the points, they all can probably be bunched under an umbrella of a theme. And I went through it and I was like, self-worth was huge. Self-worth was probably like 75% of that list. And so to me, it really hit home that, like, okay, I could spend a million years going after every single thing on that list. It would be like walking into a completely overgrown garden and picking up one blade of grass and then one blade of grass and one tiny little plant. While there's like a massive bush that is like the thing that's causing all of these offshoots. But I'm just, like, wasting my time, essentially. Well, it's not a waste, but it's
It's
learning
not
still.
efficient.
It's not
Right.
efficient. And so to understand that, like, oh wow, that the themes are what we want to look at in our lives, so we don't get
Yeah.
lost.
And those themes, come to the core wounds, self-worth, abandonment, betrayal, rejection. These are like the core, and there are others. But and all of those affect self-worth. So if
Mm,
we're looking at a list, and I often equate it to a tree. And I say, okay, well, when we're going to be tracking, we're not going to be trimming branches on a tree. That's not going to help anything, because they're just going to grow back. These are all it seems like there's all of these issues that are going on, but really they're just all branches on the same tree that go down the same one trunk that go to one root.
mhm,
And so if we have all of these issues going on, or experiences that we feel we haven't addressed, they might all be part of self-worth. They
mhm,
might all be part of abandonment. And so if we're addressing each of those issues one at a time, we could do that, and it would be helpful. But branches can grow back, and
mm,
that might take a long time if there's a lot of branches, or we can track straight down through any one of those branches,
mm,
down into the trunk, down into the root, heal it at the root.
mhm.
And then we've taken care of the entire tree and
Yes.
all of the experiences that were related to that wound. And
Mhm.
that's efficient. And we see a tremendous amount of change
Oh,
when we do that.
huge. Yeah, that literally changes the landscape of ourselves, of our
Yep.
beings, of our inner world, of what makes us who we are and how we operate in the world. It's huge. So yeah, like getting down to the roots, so helpful. And I think that when I first started working on myself and trying to heal myself, I would often get frustrated because I was like, I've already healed this.
Mm.
Like this self-worth thing just keeps coming back. Why does it keep coming back? and and I started kind of like questioning the healing. I was like, am I actually healing if it keeps coming back? But what I've really understood over time was that, it took like many swings of the axe. It took like a few different like pulls of the roots, because it was like a massive root structure, some of these themes and issues, there could be
Mm.
layers and complexities to the root structure that maybe some of it's really obvious and visible because it's in the topsoil, and maybe some of it's really, really, really deeply rooted, into past lives, into agreements and contracts. Maybe some of it's so deeply rooted in the non-conscious world that we can't quite maybe connect with it or become totally aware of it enough
Mm.
to get the teaching from it.
Yeah.
Because, at the same time, like we'll always get the teaching from it when we heal it, but it seems more meaningful to be able to become aware of it and really fully take in the teaching in that way.
And
So
that's the thing.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, that was it. That was it.
And that's the thing. Like I love both of those things that you said, where it's like when we heal something, a teaching comes from it. Learn
Mhm.
something. And so we always say we heal first, understand later, because we're always trying to understand something before we've healed it. And it doesn't work that way, because we're trying to understand something through a wounded lens. And it's not until we clean that lens off that we can actually see what we're actually trying to look at, or the true vision of something.
Yes.
And that's the beautiful medicine and teachings that come from healing things,
Mhm.
anything.
Yeah.
And on top of that, just um the value that we get, and then how we evolve from that. And there was something else that you said in there that I really wanted to touch on, but it's kind of slipped away. I'm sure it'll come back to me.
Is it the Axeman?
That's not the X-Men. Although the swing of the axe is important to fell that tree.
Yes. Swing of
Oh,
the
it's the
axe is important.
awareness.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right? So
Yes.
you were talking about how it gets into that subconscious, and it's not in our awareness. And that's the beautiful thing that happens with tracking, is
Mhm.
that we start to pull stuff into our awareness as we're tracking. And as those things get connected,
Mhm.
comes into our awareness, it's already healing.
Exactly.
It's already shifting and changing because now we've pulled it out of that subconscious into the light of awareness, and it's already shifting because it's in our awareness now. Those are
Yes.
the tricky things that, and tracking on its own can heal so much.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. Like when you're describing that, I think of this tree analogy and how like we could be walking by this tree all the time and be tripping on the roots that are growing above ground, And we're like, damn it, that's the issue. This little root is the issue. But then when we really go down and go deep into the non-conscious and we track it all the way down, 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 down through the roots to the deepest roots, that's when we're like, oh, the issue that I thought it was is so much deeper. And then, yeah, to sit with that and become aware of that is like, that is the healing, to be able to track and then just like hold space, compassionate, unconditionally loving space for ourselves, for the issue. That is how I think, for myself at least, I've been able to change and evolve past things. Because
Yeah.
otherwise I would look at that, I would track it, and I would see the issue, and then I'd be like, I'm a terrible person. There's something wrong with me. I'm so ashamed. And then I just want to like get a backhoe and just like put more dirt on this thing.
Fill it in.
I just be like, let's not look at these roots. Let's not trip over them. Let's just backhoe. Let's just fill it. Just so the top of the tree sticks out, but but it's not going anywhere.
Right.
And then we have to like accommodate this massive hill of dirt that's now in our landscape.
Yeah. You've made a mountain out of a molehill,
Exactly.
essentially, like a literal mountain.
Yeah.
And that's that thing that owning it part, right?
Mm.
Is because sometimes we'll dig stuff up and we'll be like, man, is that what I've been doing? This whole time?
Oh,
Is
it's
that
so hard. It's so hard to see it.
yeah. But it's okay, right? I remember just like wrestling with some of that stuff and being
Yes.
like, that's not me. It's not who I am. And it's not, but it has been maybe an aspect of us that maybe isn't our favorite,
Mhm.
but we've gotten this far and it's okay, right? It's
Yeah,
okay. Because when we know better, we do better, right?
exactly.
And so
But
like just own
yes.
it
Yes.
and then transform it, right?
Yeah, in theory, yeah, but it can be tricky. Like there's been times where I've tracked and I'm like, oh, it's like that Taylor Swift song. Like, I'm the problem is me. Like I've lived 25 years blaming this other person in my life for this pain. And I am the problem. Or even worse, like I've actually been doing that to them, you know?
That's
Or I've
that
been doing that to
double-edged
somebody
sword.
else. Like,
Yeah.
what? Like
Mhm.
that the tracking can, I think maybe that's why the backhoe comes in and we fill things in when we accommodate with this massive hill, is like it's so painful sometimes to become awake to the real roots and to own
Yeah.
it.
That's that shadow work that everyone likes to
Yeah.
coin, right? The shadow work term.
Mhm.
But how liberated we become and how much freedom we have internally when we just bring love to those things too. So instead of like beating ourselves up over whatever it might be,
Mhm.
owning it and then reconciling it in some way where,
Mhm.
and that's where breath work is amazing with, it doesn't have to be like, you know, crazy technical breath work. I mean, just literally breathing into something, just taking some
Mhm.
deep breaths into something. And sometimes we can't even take deep breaths into it because
Mhm.
it's such a like, ugh,
Yes.
so we just breathe into it, even if they're shallow breaths. We're breathing into that, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And then they'll get deeper
Mhm.
and then stuff will start to move. And that's the energetics of things, right? That's the spiritual body. And we start to feel it in the physical, we notice it in the mental, the emotional,
Mm-hmm.
and our beliefs start to shift, which our that's in the realm of our spirit there that creates our reality.
Yeah.
So it's a super simple notion, tracking, but can affect tremendous change.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such an important part of walking this path, right? Of being aware of ourselves
Yeah.
and being aware of the world that we create for ourselves, that we walk in, right? What
Mhm.
path we're choosing to walk,
Yeah.
because we get to choose the path we're walking. We all get dealt different cards in this life. Um, and we have different gifts and we have different experiences and all of those things. Um, and no matter what cards were dealt, we can still choose how we play that hand,
Absolutely.
how we walk that path, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then um with what, are we walking it with compassion? Are we walking it with love?
Yeah.
And awareness and
Mm-hmm.
tracking is like key to awareness of self.
Yeah. Like I like how you say, we can choose the path we walk. And as you said that, I just saw like, the fact that if you're on a path right now in your life and you're just waking up in some way, you're just waking up and you're looking around, you're thinking, this isn't it for me. Something about this isn't quite aligned with where I'm supposed to be or how I'd like to be. Um, from that moment in time of waking up, you could track back and see, where did this begin? Where did I get a little off track? Where did this pattern show up where let's say, for example, I've been betraying myself in some way and I'm
Mm,
waking up to that self betrayal. I'm waking up to the fact that I haven't been listening to myself and myself knew this isn't it. This isn't it. I've been betraying. If I'm waking up in that moment, I can track back to say, when did this begin? When did I first betray myself? When did I betray myself the worst? How has this pattern shown up for me? And if I can go back and track it to that root and heal it, then I see this image of our ability to pivot at that point. We can pivot like in any direction we want and then shoot that arrow forward into our future.
mm,
Whereas, without the tracking back and healing through that whole, like the whole thing, then we're kind of like, I feel like it would be harder to pivot in some ways. It's like we have to kind of go back, or else we're kind of tied like an anchor to this past trajectory of our life. So to really go back and heal it, and then we have this freedom to decide, what is my path? How do I want to be? I'm not tied to this anchor anymore.
right. I've
Mm,
untied it. I'm untethered.
I'm
I'm
untethered.
free. I've
Yeah.
liberated myself.
I can choose.
Yeah.
I can choose
Yeah.
how I want to be, where I want to be, you know?
And it's so beautiful. It's that double-edged sword of the wound, right? So
Mhm.
how it manifests itself is like we experience betrayal. And then um we take that in. And then betrayal kind of lives within us, and the energy of that lives within us. And then we start betraying ourselves.
Mhm.
And then we start betraying others before they can betray us, and it becomes this just all encompassing double-edged sword where it's like betray self, betray others, and this is the full manifestation of the wound.
Yeah.
And when we become aware of that and how it happened, we can find compassion in ourselves. Oh, I
Mhm.
see, it's liberating in that we can suddenly see how that happened.
Yeah.
and how naturally it did, and how it kind of, because it was left unhealed, how it developed. And so we can kind of understand, that's like the beauty in tracking, is that we start to understand how something came to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we can find compassion in that, because we see how it evolved. And then we can even extend that compassion to where it came from, because
Yes.
that evolved in someone else for
Mm-hmm.
it to be passed on to us,
Yes.
right? The energy of that.
Yes.
And so, we can untether so much
Mm-hmm.
just through that understanding,
Yeah.
just through that. And it is very empowering to track something and then understand, okay, this is where this came from.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have all of this fear of like, why is this happening? How is this happening? Where is it coming from?
Yeah.
And for us, we always see how that manifests in the body as well, because our health can betray us, or so it might show up in the body in some way, in some physical way that we can feel.
Yeah.
um and how it affects our mind when we are working with this filter over our eyes of betrayal. And then we have an experience and it comes through that filter, and all we can see is betrayal
Mm-hmm.
through that experience. Whereas somebody who doesn't have that lens would have the exact same experience as us,
Yeah.
but would see something completely different, would have a completely different experience, even though it was exactly the same. These are the different lenses that are wounded lenses that we might be wearing.
Yes.
And so then that's tracked into our spirit, because that's a belief that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've tracked through, and of course, the feeling of betrayal elicits emotion, whatever those might be. So then we've already tracked through the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual layers of something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Plus the timeline of how that began, where it began. And it's so empowering to just witness ourselves in that way.
Yeah. To see it in its full totality of how it shows up in our life, how we experience it, and where it came from. Like to see it from like a full spectrum lens, so to speak. And I love the fact that we can also track, we can start anywhere. Like, for example,
Mm.
if we're dealing with like an emotion, we can track, go in that door, say, what is the emotion that keeps popping up for me? What is this emotion? Where did it start? And kind of go from there. But if it's also a physical issue, like I'm having chronic migraines,
Mm.
let me track into this. What is my body asking for here? Why is my body holding this pain in this particular way, in these particular situations? And then, okay, so what are the thoughts I have about this migraine? What are the feelings that come up? What are the beliefs? And I think it's so neat that like everything, like we could choose any door to go in to start this tracking.
Right. Any branch, any door,
Yeah.
and it'll take us along the pattern, right? And
Mhm.
even with migraines, you know, um, thing or something that's like really significant, and we ask, okay, well, when did that start?
Mhm.
And like when I was around 12. Okay, what happened when you were around 12? And there is almost always some kind of significant event
Mhm.
coincides with that in their life.
Mhm.
And it doesn't take them long to pull it up, though they never connected the two.
Yes.
It was never connected for them. And the moment we make a connection like that,
Yeah.
everything starts to open up, things start to make more sense, and it starts to become more tangible, so
Mhm.
that we can start to change it,
Yes.
and bring relief to the pressure that's happening in the body, right?
Yeah.
When we make those connections, and that's one question that
Yes.
we just tracked, and all of a sudden opened an entire door of, oh, okay, right, that was never correlated before.
Yeah. And even the concept that the migraine could be coming from something other than just a purely physical root, that there could be some connection with the emotions, with the thoughts, with the beliefs. Like
Hmm.
even connecting that is huge for some people to realize that there is such a strong connection between all parts of us. And yeah, I've had that experience a lot, like for myself too, because I think that's why it's so important to work with other people as well. Like obviously, like I can track on my own in my own way, but I have major blind spots. I have things I don't
Right.
want to see,
Yeah.
want to acknowledge that
Yeah.
that's coming from that, because then I have to change something. I have to have a hard conversation with somebody. I have to put up a boundary. I have to say no to that other person, or I have to change something inside of myself if I really acknowledged and tracked an issue in my life, then and owned it, then I'm okay. So if were to heal this, if I were no longer having this belief that I am a certain way, whatever that is, and I healed it, then that means I have to show up in a new way. I have to
Right.
show up in the healed way. I have to show up in the way where I am loving myself and taking care of myself. And that's scary. So I'm just not going to track it. I'm not going to see it. So everything can just stay the same. And so working with other people who can reflect back, ask good questions, not let you sort of skirt around it so much. Um, Obviously that's an art as a
Yeah.
practitioner to understand where somebody's limits are to what they're ready to do.
Yeah.
Um, I think that it's a really important art to get good at, for other people's safety and respect, I guess, for
Mhm.
their limits. Um, but yeah, I think that we're working with other people where they can track for you, can be invaluable, because there's been so many times where I've worked with you or somebody else in class, and I'm like, whoa, mind blown. I had no idea. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. And I've never asked myself that question before. So it's like, wow. And other people they hear things and see things differently, right? Because we all
Right.
have like our autopilot in our brain of how we think of things and how we look at things. So if we tell our story to somebody else and they reflect back, hey, did you know that when you were talking about, the fact that, you know, I'm just trying to think of a good example here, but, like if I'm talking about an issue and then the person's like, hey, did you realize when you talk about that, you're always touching your low back?
Yeah.
Like, oh, wow, I
Yep.
didn't realize that. Yeah. I think that issue is in my back. And it's representing this like lack of support or whatever it is. Like it's stuff we often can't see for ourselves, you know.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
so invaluable.
And it's wonderful to have friends like you and I, we do this for each other all the time,
Mhm.
is to have friends who are really good at listening, who can ask questions like that,
Mhm.
that can help you kind of track things,
Yes.
like, okay, when did that start? You
Mhm.
know, where do you feel that? How
Yeah.
does it, and so we don't actually have an answer in mind. We're not trying to lead anyone anywhere except for them to be able to open up some doors in themselves and
Mhm.
say, oh, because as you said in the beginning, we have all the answers within us, right?
Yeah.
We're just helping somebody pull those answers out of themselves
Yeah.
or helping ourselves pull those answers out of ourselves. And
Mhm.
that's the objective,
Yeah.
right? Um, and and we can be amazed with what we find
Yeah.
when we do that.
And I think if anybody's listening and they're thinking, "Oh, I want to start really getting into like understanding myself more and maybe doing a bit of self-tracking." It's like, I think it's so important to do that. Have a practice where you're reflecting And maybe you do that with a friend where you say, hey, I'm going to just talk something out with you. And I just want to maybe even hear myself say it out loud, or maybe I want to
Mhm.
type it to you. I want to text it to you. What's going on for me? And maybe just reading my words back to myself is like, oh, I can see the pattern more. And when we're doing that, like there's so many ways to do that with friends or just with ourselves, with a journal, or in meditation or mindfulness. But I think it's so important to pair that awareness and that reflection with that compassion piece,
Yes.
like equal, like build them both up, the awareness
Yeah.
and the compassion at the same time. Because if we go super deep into deep tracking and awareness on ourselves, but we haven't yet built up that self-compassion muscle, it's like it can take us into a shame spiral.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that compassion piece is huge to go with anything that we're doing,
Yeah.
right? That's why
Mhm.
we practice it in meditation, because meditation is this kind of quiet brain training time, right? And um we allow thoughts to kind of float up, and we notice them, and then we let them keep floating by, right? And so we're focusing on the breath, and we practice. There's even, meta meditation is specifically this like cultivation of gratitude, a cultivation of compassion, so that we can practice these things in kind of like this mind gym, meditation's like our mind gym. And then we can go out into the world and apply those things because we've been training ourselves for it. And then in the regular world, there's all kinds of, you get different stuff thrown at you. It's a lot busier, it's less controlled, but we practice in more of a controlled space. In yoga, we do this, in meditation, we do this. And really you can apply it to any of your own personal practices where we're training ourselves in to be compassionate, to have gratitude. Gratitude journals are beautiful for that. And so that when we're just kind of walking the path through life, we're actually just defaulting to these things because
Mm.
we've trained for them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so many of us walk around completely loose, no training whatsoever. And we're
Yeah.
walking around with this incredibly powerful mind, incredibly powerful, with no training in it.
Yeah.
And so it's wild. It's like a, wild animal. It's all over the place.
It's like a
That
squirrel that's
squirrel,
like
squirrel.
going from like branch to branch.
Yeah. No wonder we feel exhausted. No wonder we feel anxious.
Yeah.
No wonder we can feel depressed, right?
Mhm.
Because we've not done any cultivating of this powerful mind that we have, incredibly powerful,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm. And
So
that
important.
cultivation is so important for the tracking,
Yeah.
to be able to focus and track and not
Mhm.
get like, oh, like a squirrel mind, like, oh, there's another nut. Oh, there's another nut. Oh,
What was
this
I
is that.
doing?
This
Oh
is that. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. But it's
Tracking.
also, but as you say, like to build the muscle of equanimity and compassion, so that whatever we do find, we can sit with it. We can hold it with love in our hands, even if it's something that maybe we haven't wanted to look at before.
Right.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's wonderful to see, when um clients will just start to pick it up where they know, okay, we're doing some tracking, okay, and they know there's like some standard questions that I ask when we're tracking, right? And so they start to like become very familiar with that, and then they start doing it on their own at
Mm.
home. And then they're like, I'm asking myself the questions that what questions would Lisa be asking me right now?
You're training your
And they're
clients.
yeah, but it's so wonderful because that coming into the awareness is like, once it's in your awareness, it's already changing. And
Yes.
so like you're doing so much work for yourself when you're doing that.
Yeah.
And before we began, you did mention too that we can overtrack, right?
Totally.
We can
Yes.
overtrack, and we have
I
to
do
be
that.
careful of that too.
I do that a lot. And you probably have watched me type to you a lot in our little messenger thing.
I
I'm
think we
like,
can all do it. We can
I do it
all
so much. Like any
overtrack.
issue that comes up in my life, I'm like, what do I need to heal? There's something I need to heal here. And Lisa, you're often being like, yeah, but what if you've healed it? And this is just it playing out in like the healed way. What if you're in the healed outcome now? And this is it. And this is the test or whatever. Like, what if there isn't something to heal here? So yeah, like I think the overtracking can happen. I don't know if it's for everybody, but I think when you're on the path of like really looking at yourself and healing things, I think it can be a slippery slope into like over analyzing everything, labeling
Yes.
everything, pathologizing. I don't think that's the right word.
It's a
Everything.
word now.
Yeah.
I
Like
like it.
just like,
It works.
even like on, on social media, TikTok. I'm not on TikTok anymore, but like just like all these social media little reels or whatever, where people are like, do you have these symptoms? That means you have ADD or ADHD or whatever it is. Like we're trying to like figure out things, which is great. Like we all want to figure out ourselves and understand ourselves. But I think that it can get to the point where we're just like, yeah, like over analyzing everything about ourselves. And it can be really helpful to focus and understand, okay, what are the main themes here? And yeah, and like, just kind of like have a bit of a focus with that. Like I'm going to do like 10 healing sessions on this theme and then reevaluate and see where I'm at. And that's going to take some time. And that's okay.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And we want to track to a route. But if we find we're like, it's just like this never ending tracking, then that's a good time to either let it go and just like sleep on it or take a walk in the woods and then just let something kind of bubble up.
Yeah.
Let it go and then notice what comes into your awareness in the next week or the
Yeah.
next 4 days. And if you're still not, I always say get support, right? There's
Mhm.
there's people who can help you just heal what the root is, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Heal what the root is and then you can take leaps and bounds forward,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah. 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 That feels complete to me.
Yeah, it does.
Awesome. Amazing. I'm looking forward to next time. I can't
Yeah,
remember
me
what the
too.
topic is, but I think it's going to be wonderful.
It
And
is going to be wonderful because we planned an amazing season
we
and I'm
did.
very excited about it.
Yes, me
So
too.
we can't pitch the next one because we don't remember it off the top of our heads.
Are you looking it up?
I am. I think it might be nature and
Oh, I've got it
harmony.
here.
What have you got?
I have
Oh,
soul
soul
parts.
parts.
We're talking
Ho
about soul
ho.
parts next time.
Soul parts are cool. That's
Yeah,
going to be a cool conversation.
it is. Yes.
I look forward to that one. That's
Yeah.
going to be a good one. Soul parts are huge,
Yeah.
right? It's like such a big deal.
Mhm.
And we'll definitely get into that. So definitely join us for our next conversation. So for
Yeah.
episode 4, soul parts.